I don't know if the mic is on or I have to.
No, that's it. Perfect.
Something. That you give so much space to my portfolio. But I like this a lot, not just because it's my portfolio and I have the best possible job in the world. It is also because there is a real crucial time. And why is it? I'll try to explain to you. So why is today the enlargement policy also a security policy? Or why is just supporting reforms no longer enough? And what we can do not to leave, I call them blind spots on our continent. Janis, yeah. And when I started my post in December, I used to say that enlargement at that time was different than enlargement 5 years back. And today, on May 28th, I say that enlargement today is different than it was in December. So much changes are going on. Why? Because we are confronted not only with Russia, we are also facing a retreating United States in our immediate neighborhood, scaling down decades-old policies of supporting democracies, democratic voices, independent media, and effective judiciaries. This poses a direct short-term security challenge. And today it is clear that if we want to have peace and security on our continent, we Europeans need to take charge of our future. Probably Charles de Gaulle would love to listen to me now when I say that we have to reach strategic autonomy in Europe. So we have what it takes to meet this challenge, but we also need to believe we can. And it is a task we simply cannot fail. The Ukrainian writer Yuri Andrukovich recently warned, I quote, "A Russian triumph would above all be a disgraceful and terrible parable of how evil, despite having no real chance of victory, prevailed only because the good lacked the courage to rise to the challenge." And he's right. We have the means, and we must not lack courage. Not the courage to improve Europe's military readiness, and not the courage to complete the unification of Europe. So enlargement for me, it's about security, and enlargement for me, it is about the unification of Europe. Many have tried before in the past, the Habsburgs, the Romans, the Habsburg, perhaps Napoleon, but now for the first time, we have a real chance to unify our continent. And once and for all, we need to stop expecting others to do our job and decide the security architecture of our continent above our heads. If we Europeans want a seat at our own table, we need to be capable to act and demonstrate unity. In many ways, we are today paying the price for non-action of the past. For much too long, we looked inwards. We did not act decisively enough in the Western Balkans, and until 2022, we didn't even dare to contemplate full membership for Ukraine and Moldova. That's why we have given them, and Georgia too, the best possible free trade agreements, because we didn't expect that they will apply ever. So now we need to finish the job under more difficult circumstances, because in a world to which power politics has returned, we Europeans can only be successful if we remove remaining blind spots. And this is why today, again, enlargement policy is a security policy. And what follows from here? We absolutely need to take the next step with Ukraine and Moldova now. Both countries have done their homework. Everything is ready to open the first cluster. Negotiating Ukraine's accession will give the strongest possible guarantees to address Hungary's concerns over its minorities in Ukraine. We need to process to move forward, to keep up momentum for reforms in Ukraine, to help our member states tackle their concerns, and ultimately to respond to our biggest security challenges since the end of the Second World War. But I will not shy away to admit that the instrumentalization of bilateral disputes is a real risk to addressing the geopolitical challenges we face today on our continent. I'm looking forward to your ideas how to address the bilateralization and your reform ideas. But we should also not fall into the trap of thinking that without a change to the current rules, enlargement cannot succeed. There is flexibility within the current rules, and we are already using it to reduce unanimity decisions or veto points, you could also say, and speed up the process. At the same time, we are pushing ahead with accelerated integration or gradual integration. It brings real benefits to citizens and contributes to reform ambitions in our candidate countries, as it integrates them in important areas of EU policies before they become full members. Take, for example, the work we are doing on integrating Ukraine and Moldova into the European electricity market. It will decouple them from Russian energy by 2027. And these are the energy projects we actually started a month back. So for comparison, it took the Baltic states 15 years to be fully integrated in the European electricity market. Or take the work we are doing as part of the growth plan for the Western Balkans. We are integrating these countries into our Euro payment system, into the EU's free roaming system, and we are providing incentives for improved regional cooperation. Accelerated integration also runs like a thread through all the initiatives launched by the Commission in recent months. All of them already take our candidate countries into account. I'm really proud of my team that we have been able to reach this. So be it in the EU competitiveness compass, the white paper of defense, the internal security strategy, or clean industrial deal, the candidate countries are also already included. Making enlargement work will require a lot of flexibility and creativity from member states and candidates, including, as you, EPC, recommend on possible safeguards in future accession treaties. Just like we have done for the past 70 years, we will continue finding solutions as we move the processes forward. The same is true for the next MFF. We are already looking into the provisions we will need to plan for a bigger union. There is a quote President Biden liked to use: "Don't tell me where your priorities are. Show me your budget, and I will tell you what your priorities are." And I agree, and I can assure you our candidates are looking very carefully at whether our words are matched by the corresponding budget lines. Enlargement is also merit-based. Right now, we are seeing some candidates deliver reforms at record speed, and we need to make sure we can deliver our part of the deal. When I'm asked, what are you doing differently for Moldova and Ukraine because of the geopolitical necessity? One of the answers I really like a lot is that we work 2 to 3 times quicker and harder than ever before for the candidate countries before, and around 1,000 people here in Brussels from all the DGs are working on just one candidate countries. Then I also, Janis, agree with your recommendations on civil society. Civil society organizations are the backbone of any healthy democracy. I always meet their representatives when I visit candidate countries in Albania, Moldova, Ukraine, Montenegro, and last month in Serbia. My message has always been a vibrant civil society is a strength. Work with all parts of society, because a true democratic transformation is only possible if it's owned by everyone. But the governments don't like this everywhere, because they think that the civil society organizations are intruders or kind of a watchdog. Of course they are, what the government is doing, and what we see in many countries in the European Union also, that the right populist, one of the first moves they do is cutting of the money for the civil society organizations, if I just step at this example. But there is more to the enlargement today. We need to be clear that just working with the candidates on reforms and preparing our union internally is no longer enough. They did the job in the 80s when we integrated Southern Europe. For instance, we have really responded well when at the end of the dictatorships in Greece, in Portugal, in Spain, we have been able to integrate the countries. Or then in the 2000s, before the Big Bang enlargement, but no longer today. We need different approaches. Why? Our candidates today are confronted with a whole different set of challenges. Ukraine is the obvious example. Others like Moldova are frontline states in an unprecedented hybrid and disinformation war. And this is also a geopolitical test. Our future members need to be sure that we stand up for them when they get under attack. How do we do that? Let me give you the example of Moldova. I was there 10 days back and I was doing a 3-day mission. Why? And I will go back again. In September, this country squeezed between Ukraine and Romania will hold parliamentary elections that determine its European path. If pro-European forces maintain a majority, the country could be ready to join the Union perhaps before the end of this decade. But if pro-Russian forces retake control, Russia may leverage the Transnistrian region to destabilize the southern border of Ukraine and try to get direct access to Odessa as the remaining access point of Ukraine to the strategic Black Sea. This winter, we got a glimpse of the Russian playbook. Russia cut off gas supplies to Moldova and then blame it on the president of Moldova, Sandu. This was clearly meant to destabilize the government. But our response took Moscow by surprise. We provided Moldova with the financing to push the energy prices back down. We started the integration of Moldova into the European electricity market, and we approached Moldova respecting its full territorial integrity. Our offer, namely, included the Transnistrian region, and it worked. We diffused the topic as a vote winner for those who want to weaken Europe, and we demonstrated that in turbulent times, the EU is a partner to rely on. Even in Transnistria, several steps were taken to open channels to Europe because we offered them help. We said, we can provide you with the money that you will be able to buy a gas. But we want to see political prisoners freeing. We want you to reintroduce Romanian-speaking television and radio on your territory. We want you to close the illegal border crossings. And we want you to reopen Romanian schools. Small steps or big steps, but with real impact. Today, Moldovan TV already attracts more viewers than the Russian television. This is really what I'm very proud of. And last time I was there, I was giving a big interview speaking not that nicely about the Russian influences there. And this was transmitted also to the Transnistria. Earlier this month, as I told you, I was in Moldova to build on this, what we have done in February. So I signed a new investment plan. But more importantly, I was there to engage, and I like this expression, in a battle of narratives. You will lose your identity. The EU will destroy local agriculture. EU aid will indebt your country for years. Those are some of the narratives that are being planted day in, day out by the Russian propaganda. So we have analyzed those narratives. We didn't have to think deeply what to do now. We just turned around the Russian narratives and do the opposite. So I went to towns and villages. In 3 days, I visited 9 towns and villages. We copied the Russian playbook. We met mayors, farmers, entrepreneurs, and young people. I knew exactly why I am going to which city, whom will I meet there, what will I wear. So every day I was wearing a different iya. Iya is the special blouse like they have in Ukraine. Vyshivanka, they have iya. So for each region, I know exactly what kind of pattern. And of course, I knew exactly what I will eat there, that I was able to speak about how actually their dishes, their tradition, their culture is important. So I was there to listen, to explain, and to take away fear. Mm-hmm. I'm now encouraging, I took over the, Jacki, you would like this, you are very decisive too. I took over the informal control of the visits of all the other commissioners to Moldova. Really, so it was a nice gesture. They like it a lot, but I think that we only can be successful if we knew exactly, if now the commissioner for energy is going there, that we know where he is going, what are the messages, and really whom he should meet. And now we follow this through the whole of the year. So why is this so important? We must not leave the field to our adversaries, and we must not leave blind spots on our continent. And this is something new in our strategy. Today we took this logic a step further to our wider neighborhood with our new Black Sea strategy adopted a few hours back at the college. In the Black Sea, we see the return of history very, very clearly. Like in the 19th century, the Black Sea is once again a contested space with enormous ramifications for European security. This is why our new strategy has a strong security component. It looks at demining, at maritime safety, and at protecting critical underwater infrastructure. It maps out how we can best develop new energy corridors, transport links, and digital infrastructure that links us to the Caucasus and to Central Asia. So it is mostly about the connectivity of Central Asia to Europe on the right side of the Black Sea, meaning on the south side. So our partners in Central Asia wanted that as much as we do. There is a lot of demand in the world today for cooperation with reliable and predictable partners. And to have a bigger picture, our goal is clear. We want to see this region successful. Again, we have studied the narratives of Russia. The narratives of Russia are they should not develop, because only if they are underdeveloped, we will have the influence there. So our narrative is we will develop them, treating them as a partner. Of course, there is also something in for us, but this is a partnership. So, and this will all help us diversify away from Russia, and it will help us de-risk. In this respect, it matters greatly that the Black Sea is home to several EU candidate countries. It is a home to EU member states, and it is a home to countries who will never become a member of the EU. So because this means we already have frameworks in place to work together on investments and make sure new infrastructure is synchronized with EU standards and linked up with our transport and energy corridors. And especially Turkey will play a central role. Yes, we disagree on many issues with Turkey, but we share a common interest in regional stability. So if we cannot go on with a candidate status with Turkey, there are other options for our partnerships. Ladies and gentlemen, standing up for Europe and our own interests can be only successful if we take full and effective responsibility for our own destiny. And I'm very optimistic about Europe. Why? The European Union has been always able to find the solutions to the most impossible problems. When there was an agriculture and food crisis in the 60s, we developed the European agriculture policy. When there was an economic crisis in the 80s, in 1982, we got the common market. Today, this is a market of 450 million people. When there was a financial crisis, one of the results has been a banking union. And when we had a COVID crisis, then we again could act. Perhaps we need sometimes a pressure to really do what's the best for Europe. And I know we have the power also to act geopolitically and with unity, especially today when many autocrats or autocratic regimes would like to see us fail. So I strongly believe if we do it right, we could unify Europe. And perhaps with your help today, I will not just only listen, I want to learn from you. I will get some ideas on how we can get best there.
Thank you very much indeed, Commissioner, for underlining not only so eloquently just how much is at stake, how important this really is right at this moment, but also those challenges that we need to meet if we are to meet what you called this geopolitical test of our times that enlargement poses. And thank you also for ending on an optimistic note, a yes we can note, because in Brussels we too often descend into the council of despair. So thank you so much for providing so much inspiration for our conversation. Let me bring up the authors of that paper that I mentioned earlier to react to what the Commissioner said and to delve into some of the issues she has raised. I'm delighted to welcome Janis Emmanouilidis, EPC Deputy Chief Executive and Director of Studies. Janis, come and sit next to me. Corina Stratulat, Associate Director and Head of the European Politics and Institutions Programme. Johannes Greubel, Senior Policy Analyst and Head of Programme and the Connecting Europe Project Lead. And Berta López Domènech, Policy Analyst in the European Politics and Institutions Programme. Just because I committed a schoolgirl error, which a professional moderator should never do, of not turning on my mic, those of you who are online may not have heard me say, if you have a question for our panel, please put it in the Q&A box, not the chat, the Q&A box, and please be very brief, and I will incorporate as many of those as possible, plus questions from all of you. Corina, can I just start with you in terms of what we're talking about, and then we'll come to the issue of why this matters so much and build a little bit on what the Commissioner was saying. Just referring to the paper, the Commissioner was saying we need to take the next steps, particularly on Ukraine and Moldova. The paper identified two options, what you call the strategic regatta option, I like the phrase, but it seems, Commissioner was talking about the merit-based approach, it seems pretty much what we're doing at the moment. And then it talked about speedy Big Bang, but said this is not realistic, but it would be an important signal to send. So my two questions to you are, does strategic regatta really differ from the approach the EU is currently taking? And if speedy Big Bang is not realistic, why include it as an option now? Because you discarded other options. Why didn't you discard that one completely?
Thank you, Jackie. Can you hear me?
No. No.
All right.
Hang on. Try the other one. We got two mics here. Let's see if the other one is more responsive. There we are. That's on. Certainly.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. Oh. And no, still not working. Okay.
It's working. Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the question, Jackie, and thank you very much to the Commissioner for taking the time to brief us on enlargement policy at the moment. Regarding the question that you pose, there is a difference, first of all, in our strategic regatta with the regatta approach that we have at the moment. You see, at the moment, the official line is that countries advance when they are ready.
Yep.
As they fulfill conditions, and they join when they fulfilled all the conditions set, right? Except that it's becoming more and more difficult to see the end of that list of conditions set on countries. And then when countries do meet conditions, sometimes very difficult conditions, and sometimes very sensitive conditions, the member states do not always keep their word to deliver on the rewards that were promised to these countries. So, and I would say that at least in part, if not to a large extent, this also then affects the motivation of the aspiring countries to actually undertake the hard work and deliver the reforms. Huh? And of course, it's very important, I think, to mention here that there is nothing wrong with wanting and asking countries to do to meet standards and to do reforms that in the end prepare them to take full advantage of the membership and to do well by themselves. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is rather that good intentions come crashing against very harsh political realities, both in the member states as well as in the aspiring member states. So the process is nominally a regatta, but in reality is a very harsh political game. Okay. What we mean then with the strategic regatta is that the EU and its member states have to stop trying to sell enlargement as a technical exercise and acknowledge it for what it is, which is a political process, a political tool in the EU's strategic interest, just as much as it is in the interest of the countries who are seeking to join. And if assuming the political character of the policy means basically two things, and I'll be very short. The first, you make waves literally, you make waves as opposed to just waiting for waves to happen. Okay. That's one thing. And second, you use the momentum of the waves to strategically to get further than when you are at the moment, because and when I say to get further, to get the union to advance, because you want to keep pace with the changes and with how the world is advancing, because otherwise you are going to be left behind. And behind at the moment is an increasingly difficult place to be in. Okay. And then when it comes to, so that's the strategic. Okay, so Speedy Big Bang, very briefly now. Why is it in if it's not realistic? Well, because we're not in the business of saying only politically realistic things. It's our job as analysts to also say what should happen. And at least my personal opinion is that this is a desirable way forward. There are the arguments in favor of a big bang, for me, outnumber the arguments against it. Okay, okay, maybe come back on that if we have time later. Janis, I want to come to, I'm going to be a little bit provocative now, because we heard the commissioner say enlargement is a security policy and a geopolitical test. Corina just there talked about the harsh reality. Antonio Costa also said in a speech recently to the EU, and I quote, "Today, enlargement is the best geopolitical investment the EU can make." And if it is so important, and everybody pays lip service to this notion that this is now a geopolitical imperative, why does it feel as if we are constantly bogged down and really not making the progress that we need? They are confronting this harsh reality that Corina talked about over and over again. Why is that? And what would you say? You said we're not in the business of only saying what is politically realistic. What would you say to them about the wisdom of this very cautious approach?
Well, first of all, I think that if you look back over the past 2 to 3 years. So since February 22, since the aggression of Russia against Ukraine, I think we've made major steps when it comes to enlargement. We are living on a different planet when it comes to enlargement. Commissioner was saying that since December, we're living in a different situation than we have been at that time. So things are obviously progressing in a technical sense also. We see that there is progress in the negotiations, both with the Western Balkans. Commissioner was already referring to the trio. So there is huge technical progress. The thing is, as to whether we actually have the political will, the political readiness to turn our Sunday speeches, declarations, and promises which we have made to candidate countries into reality. And here I think, there is a discrepancy between what we're actually are saying and what we actually are politically ready to deliver. And interesting enough, there are multiple reasons which people refer to and different actors are referring to. Just let me give you some examples. Some argue, some governments argue, some actors argue that enlargement is too difficult. It is complex, which is too complex. The EU already is too difficult to operate with. So how can we operate in an EU of 30 plus? Others say it is far too costly. And they have in the back of their mind, it's far too costly for us, meaning that if we go ahead with enlargement, there will be less money coming from the EU budget to myself, to us. There are others who say it's too dangerous, especially when they look towards the east, because it might get us into a situation where we'll be confronted with an adversary to the east, which is a dangerous adversary. Others say the EU is not prepared itself. So I think there are multiple reasons why there is a discrepancy between what we say in public and what Monday realities look like. And if you discuss this behind closed doors, you will hear that. That is, by the way, also a reason what motivated us to write this report, in order to push this debate, to have an honest debate about enlargement and reform, because we think that both things are linked with each other.
Okay, thank you. Hang on, Corina. Johannes, I will come back to you, but hang on a second. One of those arguments that Janis just said is made is the EU is not prepared. But the commissioner said, and I'm quoting, we must not fall into the trap of thinking that without a change in the current rules, enlargement cannot succeed. Now, your paper talks about the two things going in tandem. You want to see an EU enlargement roadmap and you want to see a comprehensive EU reform plan. To those who say, the EU is not prepared and they'll have to wait until we're ready or things will grind to a halt. What do you say to them? Because you are saying in the paper these two things are inextricably linked. So how do you square that circle?
Yeah, thank you, Jacki. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Commissioner, for the speech. Maybe let me say one sentence on the urgency that we're facing. Because the urgency is, of course, as the Commissioner said, due to a changed security environment, having a stark effect on European security. But I think we're at the point where this also affects our very democracy, and particularly since last December or now January, since the US backtracking, we're at the moment where this instability, this retracking will affect our democracy. So the very support for civil society, the backbone of the process, Commissioner put it, losing funding, losing a quite stark funding of existing channels is a severe challenge for the entire democratic process that we're facing. So I think we're at the point where inaction no longer leads to the stalling of the process, but rather to regression of the process and the democratic progress that we're making. Now, on linking enlargement and reform and how to square the circle of progressing with both, I think on paper there is consensus also among heads and states of government that these are processes linked, not least since the Granada Declaration a few years ago, since the Belgian Council Presidency's report, but also if you remember Antonio Costa's speech, which you already cited at the EPC a few weeks ago, when he said that these processes are going hand in hand. So I think there is awareness for the fact that this needs to go in hand. The question is, how can we deliver that? And it is our conviction, and that's also why we wrote the report, that we have to think these together, but that we need reform for enlargement, but also for that we need reform even without enlargement.
Indeed. And I want to come back on the question of which reforms you absolutely need for enlargement, or where is there already the flexibility the Commissioner spoke about, which means you don't necessarily need to do it now, and where it's reform for reform's sake, for the EU's sake. But Berta, just in terms of that big picture for us, your sense of where we are in terms of the EU's real commitment. There's no doubting the Commission's commitment to this process, but when you look at the member states to meet this geopolitical test, and the Commissioner said, we are today paying the price for non-action of the past. How do we ensure we don't pay an even bigger price in future?
Exactly, and I fully agree with this statement, and I think that this is something that we have to take into account now when we are talking about the potential avenues or like the options. And I think that this is something that we need to take into account when speaking, like as Corina was saying, the difference between what we are doing now and what we are proposing in the strategic regatta. We have to acknowledge that like the state of play of enlargement as of now, especially when it comes to the Western Balkans, is the result of inaction of the past 20 years. So when looking at how to advance the process, we have to acknowledge that right now the perspective of membership is not realistic in the eyes of the Balkan candidates. So just pretending that by continuing to put this rhetoric of like the merit-based process and conditionality, this will not work anymore. So we need to actually demonstrate that this that we now are committed, like for real, to enlargement. And this means several things, and this is why we are proposing the strategic regatta option. One of them is interlinking it with reform, like the process of enlargement no longer goes alone, but goes together with reform, which will reinforce candidates that this is now we are being. Yeah, exactly. We are being honest with the proposal. This will also reassure member states that are skeptical about the readiness of candidates that, okay, this is not just that the EU is going to be ready to welcome these new candidates, and we need a success story. That's why we are proposing the waves, and we are not just saying like candidates will join whenever they are ready, but we are actually like spelling out some waves, saying like we need to have the first wave before the end of the present political institutional mandate, so that this wave will help trigger this renewed momentum.
I want to come back to that a bit later, because there are some questions relating to Albania and Montenegro, and then there are questions linking that to talking about Ukraine and Moldova and talking about the next steps there, and a sense that for those who've been waiting a long time and doing their homework, the reward may be much further away. But Corina, I want to come back on the issue of narratives, because the commissioner talked about a battle of narratives. Now, she was talking, I think, fundamentally, mainly about the battle of narratives in the candidate countries, but you also talked about blind spots within the European Union. So there is a battle of narratives out there, but also your paper, I think, talks about a battle of narratives within the EU, how you frame what enlargement is for, and really reiterating this idea that it's a way of strengthening the EU, of allies working together, that it's a means, if you like, for us to meet the challenges we face. Can you just say a couple of words about that battle for narratives, both inside and beyond the EU in the candidate countries?
Well, my opinion is that if we are to get creative in reaction to the challenges that we have, as the commissioner indicated, that we need this creativity and we need unity, then we kind of need to get on the same page with how we see the problem, or not the problem, but the reality, let's say. And in that regard, I think that for me, it's not very constructive to look at enlargement as a self-defensive tool, let's say. We do something because of others, because Russia is mean and at the borders and threatening us, or to look at it in an alarming manner, as something we have to do because of others, or as a job that has to be done. But we have to do it because we promised in 2003 that we will do it, and now we just have to.
They're all defensive reasons.
It's very defensive, and it puts the EU in a victim position, and I have an issue with that. I think we need to shift a little bit the way we look at enlargement, and we have to see it as a self-improvement, self-development project, if you want. It's something that we do for ourselves, because it's good for us, because change is necessary, because you need to keep working on yourself, because things are changing around and you cannot just be stuck in time. So it's
but is that a message, let me be cynical and go back to the realism point, is that a message that politicians really want to hear? Do it because it's just, it's good for us. Do they not need that urgency of the outside challenge in order to spur action? Go back to the point about we're good in a crisis.
I mean, possibly they need a kick in the butt, let's say, in order to get into action.
Not you.
elected politicians. But ultimately, politicians are also into analysis of costs and benefits and of doing responding to problems and to citizens' needs. That's their role.
But your key point is a positive narrative, not a defensive narrative.
That's one. And the second thing is to think about enlargement as something, as a project in which we work towards our goals with our allies and partners. It's not something that we sell to others. We sell a project of prosperity, peace, and democracy. We can't claim that anymore. There's no peace. Prosperity is at it's threatened, and democracy is at stake. We need these remain very important goals, but it's goals towards which we work together with allies as part of the enlargement project.
Any other thoughts on this question of narratives? I say it's a point that's made very strongly. Janis, you talked about political will and moving this from the technical level to the political process. Would you agree that framing it in terms of this is what we need to do to meet the challenge we now face is the wrong way round, or is it the right way in the sense that that's the sort of message that politicians understand?
First of all, if you look into the realities around us, we see that we are...
Yeah, it's sort of working. It's a bit weird.
We see the
Can you hear him?
Yes.
And let me know online if you can't.
That's the important thing. If we look around us, we see in what kind of world we live in. And that is something which relates to the security situation, it relates to the economy, it relates to the poly-transition which we're facing. So we see all these challenges, we see these pressures. But at the same time, both when it comes to internal developments within the EU and when it comes to enlargement, I don't think that we're actually living to the level of ambition which we require. We need to do more. And the question is, how do you get there? And yes, it has to do with pressures. Yes, it also has to do with crises. We have seen that the EU has developed in previous phases because of the pressure of crises, so because of necessities, but it also has to relate, and that is something which I think Corina is trying to highlight, to a positive perspective of what we will achieve if we do X, Y, and Z. If we reform the EU, if we enlarge the EU, that it is in our enlightened self-interest to go along that path and to link all these two paths with each other. Because if we don't, I think there will be a high price to pay. Now, you are asking, is this convincing politicians? And we see, and I'm being very honest here, that it is extremely difficult to promote the debate about enlargement and reform. And I'm not talking predominantly about this town, where it is also a challenge, but it is much more a challenge in the national capitals, in the member states, to find those who are ready to push the case, to put political energy, political capital into this. There are some who seem to be ready, but many who aren't. And so the question is, how do you push the member states in the right direction? Both when it comes to the Monday's necessities and realities of enlargement and with respect to reform. And we think linking both with each other is also a way not only to progress on both paths, but because they are interlinked with each other, to have individual progress by linking them together.
I want to come back to that link in a minute. Johannes, I'll come to you in a second. Berta, just in terms of, we focused really on the narrative within the EU. Within, in appealing to member states, in appealing to the population. We haven't talked so much about the populations of member states, but we'll come back to that in terms of citizens and civil society. But in terms of that battle that the commissioner is out there fighting, she said she goes there and she's determined to go on going and fighting the battle on the ground, talking about it, changing the narrative about how they may see the EU increasingly. When it particularly comes to countries where people are saying, well, we've made all this effort, and what for? And as I say, a number of questions coming in already online talking about, well, hang on, Albania, we're really close, but it doesn't seem as if we're getting there. What do you think needs to be done to win that battle of narratives in the candidate country?
I go back a little bit to what I was mentioning before, like showing that this time the offer of membership is real, because the problem is that while, as Janis was mentioning, there has been some technical progress in the past 3 years now. So like if you look at the Balkans, all of them, almost all of them have advanced technically in the process, some more, some less. But there is still this belief of like, we are never going to make it, and we are going to make steps closer. There is the growth plan, there's roaming or whatever else, but we are never going to make it. So I think, like, or the way I see it, the only signal that will demonstrate that this is a real option for now is that there is one accession. So we need, from my point of view, we need one accession in the Balkans for the rest of the candidates to see that, okay, this is now being real.
You need a case study, as it were.
Exactly. Yeah. You need a success story to convince the others, like, okay, it's worth making the effort. It's worth, in the end, like, many of the reforms that are needed in candidate countries are going to be very costly for the elites there. So you really need to make sure that the political benefits that you are going to gain after implementing all these reforms are going to outweigh the cost, so to say.
Okay, thank you. Johannes, I want, unless you wanted to add something that I wanted to come on to this other issue about, we're talking about a roadmap for enlargement, and we're talking about a roadmap for internal reform. And the Commissioner, as I say, said it would be a trap to think we have to change the current rules first or we can't do it. But nevertheless, the paper does argue there are things you need to do for enlargement, and there are things, we'll delve into those in a minute, but more fundamentally, what happens if they don't do them in tandem, which is what you're arguing for? Are we saying, okay, then enlargement is blocked because there are certain things we have to do? Or would you agree with the Commissioner, no, there is enough flexibility in the current rules that we can do a lot without the internal reform?
I think we need to distinguish about what kind of reforms do we talk about. I think there is already a lot that we can do with the flexibility that we have already at the EU level in reforming policies, in reforming adapting processes. But I think this step, this linking both processes is crucial. Also, in terms of trust building with candidate countries, seeing that there is also a step from the EU side when it comes to making reform steps.
So you're saying to them, you need to do what it takes, but you have to show we're doing what it takes.
Exactly. And the important thing is that these processes go in tandem, that these processes are thought together, but they don't, they're not completely synchronized and they don't block each other. So
but if they don't,
flexibility so that one can go without the other.
Right. So you would still say, yes, we can go ahead, but you're going to make the EU's life much more difficult if we don't do the two things together. But you're not saying, if you guys don't get your internal act together, it can't happen.
We're not saying that we have to do all the steps in parallel. We're on contrary saying we need to do them in tandem and one affecting the other. That's why we are arguing for a progressive reform step on the EU side to complement this process on the.
And Janis, can I turn it a little bit on its head? If the EU fails to reform itself, and we've talked in other events and in other fora about coalitions of the willing, or what you like to call the supragovernmental avant-garde, I always struggle to say this, the supragovernmental avant-garde, which you like to talk about. So this idea that if you can't do it within the EU mechanisms, you have to do it in smaller groups, potentially within the EU mechanisms, or indeed outside of them where it's not possible. But if you do that, you don't reform internally, so you increasingly resort to coalitions of the willing. Is there a risk that some of the candidate countries will look at the EU and say, well, this club is being hollowed out? This club is increasingly fragmenting into different groups. Do we really want to join? Does it undermine the ambition of those countries, do you think?
Let me make one reference to the past, which is linked to the question of, are we ready to enlarge? Because I need to do this. I remember in the 1990s, second part of the 1990s, early 2000s, there was a say in Poland and other countries, we're always 5 years away from enlargement, but it never happens. But actually it did happen. And it did happen because there was that people were convinced inside and outside of the then EU, that it is a historical necessity. And I doubt that today we have the same level of conviction. And if there is the sense also in countries who want to join, that there is not the same level of conviction that this is a historical necessity, they will not do their job. If they do not do their job, we will not prepare for enlargement. That's how things are linked with each other. We need to think them together, because if we don't think them together, there's a risk that we won't get either. Not a reformed EU, a not reformed EU, nor an enlargement which goes beyond, sorry for the expression, a fig leaf enlargement. An enlargement which gives those who want to join a real chance to join. Now to your question. If the EU would hollow out, would it then actually be interesting for those who are outside and want to join to become member of the EU? I have question marks. If the EU hollows out, will it still be the EU which we have got to know over the past 60 years? So I think we need to find a way to combine something which the commissioner mentioned, unity, and at the same time, a level of ambition which is strong enough given the challenges which we're facing. If we cannot do this together as 27, yes, we need to think also of groups of countries progressing, coalitions of the willing, avant-garde.
And you argue you should include candidate countries within that.
Exactly. And we also argue that if we can do that within the EU, this is preferable. We have instruments of differentiation inside the EU treaties which allow us to do so. But what we see in practice is that actually we are not using these instruments according to the needs, and we're diverting towards intergovernmental cooperation outside the treaties, which is fine as long as you adhere to a set of clear principles. And that is where what we call the open supra-governmental avant-garde, open because it is open. Call it Oscar. Remember Oscar, okay? Oscar is necessary because we need to make sure that even if there is progression outside of the EU treaty in an intergovernmental fashion, which by the way might also affect enlargement per se, because if some members do not want the EU to enlarge, we need to find other ways of how to deal with these countries who still want to join.
I'm going to stop you there. We've got lots more to discuss.
Stick to the principles which we try to clarify.
I hear you loud and clear. Johannes, Berta, quick points. Then I'm coming out to all of you. And then I want to come back and begin to delve into some of the key recommendations and how you think we progress. Johannes, short one, if you would.
Your question was how does the EU hollow out if we go ahead in coalitions of the willing? I would say exactly the opposite. I think the biggest danger for the EU to hollow out is if we stay without progress, if we stay where we are failing to deliver for citizens, if we fail to deliver unity as we're held at ransom by one member state. So we have to, of course, they're not the ideal ways, but they are the better.
It's the what we do, not worrying so much about the how. Berta, you also wanted to come in.
Just to clarify one point, like regarding like enlargement reform. Sometimes in the enlargement policy circles, when we speak about reform, we refer to the reform of the process. And here we are not speaking about reforming the process. So one thing is the reform that the EU needs to carry out internally, but we don't need to reform the process itself. The process itself, as we have it, it can work if we want to make it work and if there's political will to make it work. So when we are speaking about reform, just to point out, we are not speaking about a new methodology or changing the procedures or anything.
Got you. Thank you very much. Are there any questions in the room? And do we have someone with a microphone? Because I've been told, as people are online, I can't leap around like I normally like to do. Could you come to the front to Andrew, please? Thank you very much. Mr. Duff.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone.
Show some respect.
And congratulations on the paper, which I think is absolutely excellent. And it ought to be published quite broadly. But my question is precisely on that point about the processes. If we do go on with the formally agreed 2020 accession process, there's going to be no enlargement because Mr. Orban and Mr. Fico and I don't know whom, there'll probably be others camouflaging themselves behind the nationalist blockage. If we don't address if the President von der Leyen and Costa is not going to demand that the Council respects the Article 49 of the treaty, which is very clearly establishes that you need all member states to agree at the outset of the process and all member states to agree at the end. But as the process goes on, it ought to be the Commission that drives the opening and closing of the clusters.
Thank you. And I did want to, and perhaps Berta, pick up here, because the Commissioner spoke about what she called the instrumentalization of bilateral disputes and said it was a real risk. Your paper calls for a confidence clause, which would stop new members from shutting the door behind them, basically. And it also talks about Article 7, and we see an intensifying discussion on Article 7 at the moment, vis-a-vis Hungary. How do you perceive the way forward here? And what does the paper say about it?
So yeah, responding to the question, my point is that in the past years, I feel that we have been distracted. We have distracted ourselves with the debates on changing the methodology and making modifications to deny the reality that there was no real political will to enlarge. And here's where we have to put the focus, and that's the direction where our second recommendation on enlargement goes, that it might be that in the end we have to make some little changes, but the big thing here is that we need political will. And in the end, I have the sense that those that have instrumentalized the process are not particular. I mean, Orban might be, but also those member states who didn't want to admit that they didn't want enlargement, they have hide themselves behind, oh, it's because of Orban. I don't think that if enlargement hasn't happened until now, it's because of Orban. And then of course, we can discuss confidence clause is something that we are proposing to avoid new member states to block the newer ones. And there are other mechanisms, including Article 7 and so on, which probably Janis and Johannes will explain better. But I think that really we have to put the focus to not allow those member states that are just hiding themselves behind Orban and Meloni or Fico.
Indeed. And then there's a question also from Janis Ilkos online asking about, I wonder how the enlargement process can proceed in the current state of play with countries that are imposing bilateral issues to veto the process, which I think is what the Commissioner particularly was referring to. And what do you do about that? Is there a way that you can prevent those sorts of instances in future? What do you propose, Corina, in the paper? How do you see the solution to this? Because it always has happened. There's always been connections made between unconnected issues and connected issues, bilateral issues. How do we avoid that in the future?
Yes, and I think there's we need to distinguish here between bilateral issues between member states and enlargement countries, and between enlargement countries themselves.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yes.
and both that are very difficult.
Yep.
And they have caused huge problems over the past decades. And I think they're very difficult to avoid because the enlargement remains a bilateral process. If we talk about the Balkans, but even now with Ukraine and Moldova and Russia, I mean, sensitive issues linger on. Frozen conflicts are present everywhere, so it's not like we can just do away with them. Also, when it comes to some of the content of those bilateral disputes, it's very difficult for the EU to act on them, to have a real leverage, because there is no competence with regards to solving minority issues or borders. There's not even a common definition on minorities within the EU. So of course it's very difficult for the EU to provide ready-made solutions. So far, what we've done, we've been creative. The problem with the creative solutions that we put forward is that they've tended to be quite non-transparent, not very inclusive. As a result, whatever has come out of it has been difficult to sell to the people or has not been implemented. So when we talk about the Serbia-Kosovo dialogue or about the efforts that have been done with respect to Bosnia, we need to increase, if anything, the transparency and inclusiveness of how we deal with with these issues. That's one thing we put in the paper. The other thing is that, of course, we need to maybe think about whether we need to resolve some of these problems on the accession day. So have Serbia recognize Kosovo when it signs the accession treaty. Maybe that is what needs to happen.
So you introduce the conditionality. You will not sign unless you do that.
Maybe have North Macedonia do what, implement the constitutional changes that Bulgaria is asking for on accession day.
Okay.
Maybe that can be it. Okay. All right. If you don't want me to.
No, I know. It's just in the interest of time, I've got lots of ground I still want to cover with you all. Berta wanted to come back in, and then Janis, brief ones if you would, and then I want to come to another couple of issues the Commissioner has raised.
I will be very, very brief. When it comes to bilateralization between member states and candidate countries, first of all, use diplomatic efforts internally more, because in the end, the opening of accession negotiations with Ukraine showed that when there is political will, when there is willing to make someone go out for a coffee, it's possible. And then when it comes to the solving bilateral issues, what Corina was mentioning about involving civil society, it's not just for the sake of involving citizens, which it's good for itself, but it's to prevent leaders to then instrumentalize the agreements and boycott them. Like we saw when Kosovo and Serbia endorsed the agreement in audit, that Vučić left the room and said, like, in front of the press, I'm not going to implement anything. In the end, like when the efforts always go to broker closed door agreements between political leaders, you allow them to be the owners of this process. And this has been the same with Bosnia. When the efforts to broker a constitutional reform in 2006 took place, it was the same. There was an agreement made. A few months later, there were elections. Two of the parties jumped off the boat saying, we are not going to sign it.
Thank you. Janis, and to this confidence clause that you call for, which would, as I understand it, mean that a new member state couldn't close the door behind them. But is that realistic politically? You say, on entry, what are you doing? Are you introducing qualified majority voting for new members? Because you can't say, well, look, those who've been in the club for a long time can block another new member, but you only just joined, so you can't. How does it work?
I'm a simple mind, so I'll give a simple answer. Just imagine that the vast majority of member states, very vast majority, is convinced that enlargement needs to happen, is pushing towards it. That still needs time, but still, they are ready, they are willing, they're pushing this direction. Do you think that some others will then still be able politically to hide behind the Orbáns and the Ficsos, or that they will be able to hide behind bilateral issues, or will we not find solutions? I am convinced if we get to the moment, and we're not there, we're far away from that. If we get to the moment we're actually convinced that enlargement needs to happen, all political pressure is being put in order to get there, both within the EU, but also towards member states, towards those who want to join the club, then we will be able to overcome these problems, including the bilateral issues. If we don't, we will still continue to struggle with bilateral issues within, but also between current and future member states.
Quick one, Corina, if you would.
Just have a sentence to say. The other thing, and it links a little bit to the narrative idea that I didn't finish earlier, is that I think it's also very important to not look at the accession as the end of the road. We need to change that way of looking at the policy.
Is that why you call for these, what you call post-accession reform plan? So you continue, some commitments are given and some membership rights, you don't get full rights.
I mean,
is that
we proposals like the clause you mentioned, or the post-accession conditionality, all of that are just mere ideas. It's something that would need to be worked out, fleshed out. We say that there are ways in which bright minds can be brought together to properly think about those issues. But the main point is that you would take the drama out of the accession, and you would think about enlargement as a stepping stone to a project in which we together then work together to figure out our problems. Because I have to say that the problems that the enlargement countries are facing with security, with economics, with democracy are the same problems we're facing. So it's not like they are having much harder difficulties that they had in the past. We all have them, and we're perfect. There's no such thing. So basically, it's about changing the way we look at it and developing mechanisms ambitions so that together we can be more effective in cooperating towards our common ambitions and goals.
Thank you very much. Any others? I've got a couple I'm going to take online, but there's one just in the middle. There we go.
Thank you very much. We have observed a lack of trust in the process in the past years. I think we can all agree on that. And I'm afraid what I see here is that we are not doing much better to recover from that. Because, for example, what I'm missing in the discussion is the whole focus on the internal market for enlargement, what it means, what are the implications for the EU businesses, for the consumers. And in terms of security also, again, I think it should be based more on our internal issues that we want to address. For example, when it comes to money laundering, human trafficking, other aspects that are really close to European citizens and businesses. So this I'm missing a little bit. And then very quickly, an image that comes to mind, to me in my mind, following discussion, is that a bit of a half marriage where we are afraid of engaging in a marriage, and it's linked to all the trust issues that I mentioned, where we are discussing about the ring and the honeymoon and where to go, what to do, but the trust is not there yet fully. And I'm Albanian, I come from Albania, we are in love with Europe, we will wait forever to marry. That is true, that is true.
Yep.
That is
You will
true.
never give up.
Absolutely never. But I want to believe that we are looking at enlargement as a wedding based on love and interest. And I want it to be that way, and I want to trust the process of doing that.
Thank you for
Perhaps
bringing.
I'm a bit old-fashioned.
Thank you for bringing a little bit of poetry to the discussion. Can we please bring the microphone to the front to the Commissioner first? Thank you.
I have more the reaction, but it's so nice that somebody from Albania is speaking about the marriage. And congratulations, you're really doing well. And you've been saying before that there is no prospect for the, no prospect for the, may I?
That's brilliant. Then the camera can pick you up.
Somebody from the Western Balkan will join. Of course it will, and it will in the time when I am a commissioner. So, yes. I want to mention Albania. Yeah, you really are extraordinary there. The people, the politicians. And with the Edi Rama, we have a deal. You know, now I push all the time, it is merit-based. But we have a deal. When everything will be done right in the merit-based, it will be marriage-based at the end. So we just have to open one more cluster, and this will happen in June with Albania. Then everything is open. So then we have to close, which is, of course, very, very much important. But thank you for a hint. I think that, and many your commentaries before have been about, I have the feeling, no, I have the feeling, I know we don't communicate a lot or enough or at all about the benefits of the enlargements. And this is one of the tasks now I want, or the work I want to do with my team. So how we communicate the benefits of the enlargement, not only in the candidate countries, but also in the member states. Why? Of course, it is a technical process. Of course, it is a political process. But even if we match this process and everything is good at the end, then there could be a referendum in France and we go under. So that's why it is important. Usually we fear what we do not know. So we have to explain more what's in for both sides.
Indeed, and the paper also makes clear that is why civil society, citizen participation, not just in the candidate countries and supporting them, but also within Europe, involving them in the discussion about enlargement, about internal reform, is so important, because if you don't take everyone along with you, it won't work.
Yes, indeed. And that's why we have those blind spots. We haven't been strategically enough in the past, because it is more easy not to deal with those complexity of the Western Balkans, where there is a lot of tendency that they always never miss the opportunity to miss the opportunity. But still, somehow it is.
Commissioner, I have to read this out. This isn't a question. Commissioner, of course, you are lovely. We in Albania have fallen in love with you. There you are. There you are. I wanted to pick up on that policy question as well, Janis, with you, because we also have a question from Arsil Tepelia, apologies if I've massacred your name, about money. the MFF, and it refers to that quote the Commissioner gave about show me what the budget is and I'll tell you what your priorities are. The question is, do they mean that the costs of enlargements will be reflected in the new MFF consultation? So we tend, when we talk about internal reform, we tend to focus on the governance issues relating to, unanimous decisions, et cetera, all those things that can block progress and so on. But also we're talking about the MFF, we're talking about CAP, cohesion policy, there's a whole range of policy. And the Commissioner mentioned already taking account of the candidate countries in things like the competitiveness agenda. She was praising the work done by her team. How do you see that whole piece? And do you think there is enough of a conversation about how the candidate countries will impact on and be impacted by these key EU policy arenas?
We need to definitely be thinking and acting in large already in today's moment, which means when it comes to the future MFF, the next MFF, we need to include the perspective of the EU enlarging, which has the challenge that we do not know what kind of enlargement will happen when, how big it will be, who it will include. And we, by the way, say in the paper that we need to have an enlargement during the current political institutional cycle. And we say that there are two ways of getting there, because we say that there are two potential options when it comes to enlargement in this direction. So you need to include that in the MFF. You need to include it when you reform a CAP, common agricultural policy, when you reform cohesion policy. You need to think in large. You need to already have that in mind. The same, by the way, goes when it comes to the EU's top priorities, when it comes to economic competitiveness and security. And yes, there is an inclusion of non-EU countries into these policy areas, into these priorities. However, having said that, you need to battle to have them included. And actually the logic should be, we are thinking in large, so we are thinking of them as being part of the future EU as the reflex, not as something we need to push for. And we still need to push for. And it still is an uphill struggle to make sure that they are being included in these thoughts.
I'm going to come to Johannes.
MFF, by the way, my personal appreciation is, and I followed a number of MFF negotiations in the past, what we can expect this time around will be, sorry for my words, a much bloodier exercise than it has been in the past. It will be a much more difficult exercise because it will be a battle for the juste retour principle, for money going back to member states. And member states will be strongly pushing for that even more than in the past, meaning that if I go back to the need for them to think in large when it comes to the MFF, that will be a very difficult circle to square.
Indeed, and I have covered in my journalistic days many MFF negotiations. The only consolation I give you all is there's no British rebate to argue about for at least 24 hours these days. That has simplified life a lot and saved a lot of time. Johannes, on this question of the EU and the reform agenda, but also in policy and governance terms, what you see as most important.
There's two comments on that. As Janis said, we're not just looking at governance reform or just treaty reform. That's not what our paper is about. Our paper is about reforms in a broader sense, including the MFF. So not just discussing the MFF, but reforming the MFF when it comes to policies. So this is our part of the reform path, and I think when it comes to what is most important, I think there's two elements to it. The first thing, which we've touched upon very briefly, is the rule of law, which is crucial from different perspectives for candidate countries, but also for the EU reforming the rule of law, not only in the context of enlarging, but also at the current club that we're in, which is, of course, a difficult endeavor. But I think what is important to note there as well, that when it comes to the rule of law, we're not just talking about Article 7. Of course, that reforming Article 7 at some point in time is inevitable. But we're also talking about other reforms of the rule of law, including infringement procedures, including other informal changes, including reforms to the Commission's rule of law report or linking the rule of law report closer to other processes. So I think that is a very crucial element of the debate.
And one intriguing, Maciek, unpronounceable surname, apologies, says, to go back to your point about narratives and a positive narrative for enlargement, what is the difference between an EU of 27 with 450 million people and an EU of 35 with 510 million to the global agenda, China, USA, Africa? Is this, you talked about allies working together and that narrative, is that part of that narrative, Corina?
Yes, I would say so. I mean, definitely strength is also in the numbers, and it's better to close ranks behind more countries and more people working towards the same goals and on the basis of the same agenda, if I can say so. So definitely it's part of that narrative. But just to link into that and also to what my colleagues have been talking about when we say thinking in large, I think this is also a response to the question we got from the audience, that's how you build trust. Because if you think in large, of course, it's also motivating and inspiring and comforting for the countries who are aspiring to be part of the club, but also acting enlarged. And here I mean acting enlarged in terms of including countries in policies and in initiatives, in discussions, as we have started to do, extending benefits to them more convincingly and bigger benefits than we have done so far, and also reforming ourselves. That's also acting enlarged, because if we already start to reform, knowing that the plan is to expand, then of course it's going to build trust with these countries. And finally, acting enlarged is also about enlarging, actually doing some enlargement.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left and I want to put you all on the spot, and it links to another question that Maciek asked about how do we do this. He was saying, do you agree this enlargement process has to be much deeper than many national actors anticipate, and would you agree a convention might be the right format to handle this, including candidate countries? We don't have time to get into the detail of it, but I'm going to start at the end and come back for each of you, and I want to come back to what the Commissioner said when she said, today in many ways we are paying the price of non-action in the past. How do you see, each of you, the key next step, what the EU needs to do next? Your report has many recommendations, many things we need to do. But if we are genuinely to, and I'm quoting again, stand up for Europe and our interests and use our power to act geopolitically in the enlargement arena, what's the key next step we need to do of all the things that you highlight in your report? 1 minute each, and I'm going to start with Berta.
I can be like even shorter. Having an accession within the present political institutional mandate. So making sure that while, as you said, that while Marta was its Commissioner for Enlargement, we have at least one accession. And if possible more than one, that would be... Two accession, I'm taking.
That's good, because somebody in the audience was asking, what is the most realistic timeline for enlargement? We can say 2 within this mandate is what we're aiming at. And you sound confident of achieving. Thank you.
Sorry,
yes.
Just to use my minute. That doesn't mean just like letting whatever country in without filling the criteria. It means like being serious and really committing to assisting the next country, the first next member, in really meeting the criteria and being honest with ourselves and having the political will to do so.
Thank you so much. Johannes.
2 parts of the answer. The first one answering to the comment from online. I think at some point a convention might be inevitable, but we shouldn't now put all our baskets into a convention at this point, because that will only lead to delaying the process. We need to go step by step. In the end, maybe we will need a convention, but it shouldn't be the starting point.
So your first step of the step by step?
The first step is talking together, thinking large, talking together I think the citizens and civil society element was a crucial step. But the first step is actually taking a step, because I feel we're all at some point to some level in a waiting mode at the moment. One waiting for the other. Candidate countries waiting for the EU, institutions waiting for each other. So getting
somebody needs to take that first step.
For the June European Council, and also hope that the reviews that the Commission are reporting can inform that process.
Thank you. Corina.
Well, in keeping with the spirit of the report, I have a minimalist and a maximalist next step. The minimalist one, in which we have 2 accessions. I just hope that one will be from the trio and one from the Balkans, because if we forget the Balkans, I think it will be criminal. That's all I have to say on that. But very good that if these 2 accessions happen, and of course that we make sure that the door doesn't close after those 2 accessions, that somehow we create a process that it has sets in motion, you know, a sort of a how is this called? The snowball effect?
Yes.
Where definitely next and next and next.
And your maximalist key next step?
My maximalist would be to absolutely shock Putin and create awe and amazement by doing the Big Bang, because we can do it. We've done it before. And in retrospect, it's better that we've done it. We learned lessons. We know what we need to do to prepare for any fears. So the maximalist is let's do a Big Bang.
And I do remember a mini Big Bang, and I do remember, and we discussed this on our last democracy reform conversation. It happened. We went from talking about regatta in some form or another to Big Bang quite dramatically and quite suddenly. So you're saying it can happen again, and it should. Janis, you close it for us.
We did that in 4 years, because in 2000 we were still thinking it will be regatta, and in 2004 and 7, Big Bang was 2004 and 7. We had a Big Bang enlargement. It wasn't in one go. It was 2004 and 7. First step when it comes to internal EU reform, it's not the convention. What the next step is required is that the European Council, that's what we proposed in the paper, mandates what we call a wise women group.
We like that.
Call it a reflection group. A wise women group, which is asked to come up with a governance reform plan, taking into account all the potential internal reform avenues which are there, from technical, surgical treaty amendments to the accession treaties, up to potentially surgical amendments of the treaty, or even an ordinary revision procedure, which would potentially include a convention. Have an open mind, think of what is actually required, and start that discussion now, because it would be naive to think that we will in one go move to where we are to where we need to be. And from my conviction, the Lisbon Treaty is not enlargement ready, is not enlargement proof. It's also not future, and it's not crisis proof. We need to reform the EU. And the next step should be ask a group of wise women to come up with ideas, to reflect on what is needed. I think that will be very helpful.
Okay.
And with respect to something the commissioner said, and you asked us, I hope that in 10, 15 years from today, we will not sit here and look back 10, 15 years and say what you said today, we didn't do the homework or the work we should have done 10 or more years ago. I hope that we will not commit that mistake again, because if we do, it's a historical mistake, which will not be paid only by potential future countries, but also by the current EU. And by the way, the current EU is not perfect. There's a lot we still need to.
Indeed, but I want to also remind us amidst that stark warning of that optimistic note that the Commissioner has struck this afternoon. And with reference to the June European Council, those of you who are regular followers of EPC Update online, we will of course do our traditional post-summit briefing on EPC Update as soon as the summit ends. Join us online if you can for that. But it only remains for me to thank particularly the Commissioner again very much indeed for a great speech, so much inspiration. You gave me so much to talk to them. We could go on for hours, but we can't. You were lovely, and they're in love with you. Exactly. So thank you for being lovely, Commissioner. Thank you to our panel for being lovely, and thank you to all of you in the room and all of you who joined us online. See you again soon. Always a pleasure.